Does Utah have the best offensive tackle duo in the nation? I think so.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen and view of the day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. If it's your first time tuning into the show, make sure you like and subscribe. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. Excited to be joined by CBS national college football writer Shehan Jeyarajah. Shehan, Utah has a really good offensive tackle duo. I knew that coming into the season. But now the love is starting to trickle and pour in from the 2026 NFL draft community. These way too early scouts are starting to fall in love with these guys. So the more I dive into this, the more I'm like, oh my gosh, I think Utah might have the best offensive tackle duo in the country.
Yeah, I think they've got a really good case. I mean, I'm obviously on a lot of the All-America committees for college football. And so Spencer Fano is a name that we knew. You look at so many of the offensive line metrics that you find over at Pro Football Focus. I mean, he was up there with just about anybody, whether it's pass blocking, whether it's rush blocking. I mean, he is a really known commodity. I was curious to an extent, I guess, how the NFL would see him, whether they'd see him as that level of prospect. And I think that as you start to see, like you said, some of these mock drafts coming out for 2026, as you start to talk to people around the industry, like he is seen as that kind of player and that level of prospect. I mean, I think that he has a really good case coming into the year. Like, I think he's going to be on a lot of preseason All-America teams. And, Caleb Lomu obviously is a newer addition to this top group, a younger player who really came on as the season went along. But he's got so many of the physicals that you love to see from a big-time offensive tackle prospect. And so when you put these two guys together, I mean, it's as good a combination, I think, as you're going to find in college football.
And it's incredibly exciting if you're Utah that you can have that at a place like Utah in 2025, where NIL and transfer portal and even Utah themselves have seen some of their top guys end up at other schools. And some of the other teams that are even on here, Oregon as an offensive lineman, if you look at PFF's like too early top 10 offensive linemen entering next season, Oregon has 2 offensive linemen. Their tackle on that list is from Nebraska. So you do see some of these schools do end up losing out on their top guys. So to me, it's also incredibly exciting, Shehan, that Utah was able to keep both of these guys. And it does show that, hey, this is a Utah team that they can still bring in, recruit, and develop elite talent and retain them, which is massive in today's era.
Well, and I think that in so many ways, this is where the Big 12 has the ability to win long-term. Because look, I mean, it's not a secret that in the first round of recruitment, they don't necessarily win every single guy, right? But I think that one thing that I love that Big 12 teams have done, and I'm sure Utah has done, is they've really prioritized retention. They've really prioritized keeping their guys around and putting them in good situations and having coaches that they trust in so many ways. And I think that, again, you look at like these two guys, I mean, they are guys who have been in this program for a couple of years. There isn't this rush to try to backfill or to fill holes necessarily. They're willing to go through a multi-year process to get there. And then once they do get there, I mean, Big 12 schools have the ability at that point to obviously make it financially competitive to stick around as well, and of course try to transform them into NFL draft picks. So I think that Utah has handled that situation really well, and it's something that's been completely vital, especially when you look at some of the issues facing the offense right now.
Yes, and Utah is a place too, just the state itself has seen some of the top offensive linemen in the past leave. Penei Sewell went up to Oregon. Jackson Powers-Johnson also went up to Oregon. So if you're Utah, the fact that you were able to get a guy like Fano is from the state. Lomu's not from Utah too, but another guy you're able to keep. Lomu didn't play his first year, but then really developed obviously during his freshman year. And that's what made Spencer Fano so incredible, is the fact that he was able to play his freshman year. He was not an elite left tackle by any stretch of the imagination, but the fact that he was just on the field was a testament to his skill set, and the fact that then he goes over to right tackle, has the year he has. You already mentioned too that a lot of people are already talking about him as a guard. I'm already ready for Will Campbell was the LSU offensive lineman. They were doing all those memes about like how short his arms were already, so I could already tell Fano's going to be getting that next draft season. But he is a mauler. He's a exceptional run blocker, PFF's highest graded run blocker, which is just phenomenal. And then Lomu as well was really strong last year too. And you mentioned some of the issues that Utah's offense had last year. It seems on paper that Devin Dampier is a massive leap forward in terms of the quality of quarterback play they had. So when you have that type of a duo protecting his blind side and then just also manning the right side incredibly well too, that can open up a lot of things for this offense now that you believe you have the right guy under center.
Well, and I'll tell you what, I mean, we talked about this actually a few months ago, the last time I was on, but this is the thing about this Jason Beck offense, is that the floor is going to be so much higher because of the running game and because of what he's going to ask his quarterbacks and running backs to do. And again, New Mexico last year was the only team in the country that had multiple 1,000-yard rushers, Devin Dampier being one of them. And so that's the thing. The worst case scenario is you still probably get a 700-yard rushing season from Devin Dampier that you still put together and have potentially 1,000-yard rusher as well. And when you look at, again, like you mentioned, the top graded offensive lineman in run blocking per PFF, like that's a big deal. And while certainly it's not enough to just have a good offensive line or a good offensive tackle to have a good offense, every good offense does have that piece. They do have that guy. And actually, I'm actually working over the next few weeks on a story about offensive line play and offensive line development in this era. And one thing that I heard from Arkansas coach Sam Pittman was you don't need to have 5 guys who are all sort of these dogs, right? Who all are sort of these like aggressive, like kind of alphas in a room. You really need one. Because if you have one, then you have 2. If you have 2, you have 3, and then it just snowballs down the path. I think that Utah in so many ways goes behind Spencer Fano, and I think that it's going to really help the rest of that unit come along.
Which is massive. And it's an interior offensive line that had their ups and downs last year, but you get all 5 guys back, so you're hoping they can take that next step in the right direction. And Shehan, the Big 12 had 2 first-round draft picks. The fact that they could have 2 next year just from Utah, and that Utah, a school that had no one drafted until a former basketball player converted to a tight end, was selected in the 7th round. That's massive for this university too. The fact that you have NFL interest still, once again, being able to produce guys who are among the best at their position in the country, so that when you try and get into this college football playoff, we don't know if it'll be this year, but whenever he is, Utah continues to show a history of having guys be among the best at some key positions and having shot to do big things at the next level. Speaking of a shot to do big things at the next level, Brett Yormark has helped the Big 12 and Utah do that consistently since Utah's joined the conference. He was given an extension. Is that a good thing? That's what we're going to be talking about in one moment. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. The NBA playoffs have been absolutely electric, and if you want to get in on the action, then you need to head over to FanDuel, because every night the NBA is delivering highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments, whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player. There's never been a better time to get in on the action with FanDuel. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live, too. They have the player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays. Fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Which players are you looking to show up in big moments, and how could you look at their trend to see, hey, are they due for a big bounce back performance? Someone like the Cleveland Cavaliers, they're going to be facing elimination. What can Donovan Mitchell do with his team in a lot of trouble against an Indiana team that's been ascending? He has the same thing for Tyrese Halliburton. He's going to be able to put this Cleveland team away in the Game 5 in Cleveland. New to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up today. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. And don't forget MLB, NHL going on as well. FanDuel has you covered for all your sports action today. So Brett Yormark got his extension. Is this good? I definitely think so. His aggressive approach, I think, is what you have to be if you're not a Big Ten and ACC school right now. So I think this is good for Utah. He's clearly shown, I feel like he's the right guy to lead the Big 12 conference. And I'm excited that he got this extension, because I feel like he's going to put the Big 12 in the best, and thus Utah, in the best position they can possibly be in to stay relevant, with the SEC and Big Ten trying to do everything they can to separate themselves.
Well, I think the biggest credit that you have to give him is that no one has had more foresight over the last 5 years than Brett Yormark. He's done a great job of staying ahead of the curve. Obviously, look, I know I'm talking to a Utah audience, but he recognized that the potential of the Pac-12 collapsing before just about anybody. I think that the way that he maneuvered the Big 12 television contract to get it done before the Pac-12 was absolutely massive and is really, I think, in a lot of ways, the reason that the conference still exists. But then I think that also, too, since then, he's done a really good job, I think, of trying to position and brand the conference. One thing that I'm fascinated to see in the next couple of years that isn't football related is, he says he wants to take basketball, both men's and women's, to market and potentially sell them separate of football to television companies, because this is, over the past 10 years, the best basketball conference in the country. And of course, they added Arizona last year, not Arkansas. And they've had multiple national champions since 2020, including Kansas and Baylor. So I think that you also look on the football side. I mean, look, there isn't a team that obviously has won a national championship in the BCS era left on this league, but everybody in the conference is investing at a level that I think is really impressive. Look, from 1 to 16, I would argue that every single program is attempting at least to be the best that they can be as a football program. I think there's some great coaches in this league. I think that, again, they've done a really good job marketing what they have as well. And I think it's huge too. We've heard that that all 16 teams are planning to participate in rev share as well, which I think that Brett Yormark plays a big role in trying to make clear to everybody, why do we need to invest at that level? So again, he's just had a lot of foresight. I think that he's put the Big 12 in a good position. He's always anticipated what's coming next. And again, look, it's not a secret in the Big 12 office. He's an ideas guy, and he's had ideas that have flamed out. But I think that in this era, you need somebody who is going to be ahead of the game and not someone who's responsive.
Yes, and he absolutely is that. You mentioned some of the ideas that have flamed out, and I won't even say maybe this hasn't flamed out yet, but I'm just not a fan of, is the all-state 12. I understand like the logic behind, it's another way to get some extra money in. But to me, I look at that as at what cost, kind of. I know that hasn't been a story in a while, but how did you perceive that? And do you think that would be something the Big 12 should do?
Yeah, it's a great question because, I mean, look, like, obviously it sounds weird. It's never been done in college football before. Some people who have ties to the Big 12 were telling me, it's like, for years, the NASCAR races were called the Winston Cup, right? And like, it wasn't considered that weird. Now, I think that a college athletics conference is a little bit harder to sell me on than the idea of, a championship series or anything like that in NASCAR. But I think that there is an understanding, like, hey, you know what? I mean, like, it's not something that's necessarily been done before. And you have to ask, like, what is it really worth? Is it worth messing with your branding? I mean, again, this is something that they've talked about as well, is like, when you think of the phrase Big 12, well, like, big is already kind of like, it has a lot of brand notoriety from the Big 10, obviously. When you talk about 12, I think that they've done a good job of branding the number 12. And, they had for years, they had the 12 logo with the Roman numerals and all this sort of stuff, right? So I think they've done a good job of branding it, but like, you kind of just wonder, like, do you create brand confusion if 12 is the thing that you are trying to align more than anything else? Especially, by the way, when you still have a conference that's 16 teams at this point. So, I would certainly be wary of it. Now, look, I mean, here's the reality, is that if it allows teams to hit a level financially where it's a true difference maker, where teams are able to go from not being competitive to being competitive in a different kind of way, you have to consider it, right? But what number does that require in order to make it worth the squeeze, right? Like, if the Big 12 is the same as it is, and you're paying your schools $1 million a year, which is like not a small amount of money, but also is not life-changing money, is it worth selling your brand to that extent? I'm a little on the fence about it, but again, they're going to do the math in the room, and at least at this point, it hasn't happened.
Well, you mentioned as well the math in terms of like what each school would get from it. Well, some schools need it more than others. That's what's been really interesting in this NIL era. BYU and Texas Tech, and I think Colorado is probably in a pretty similar boat too. NIL wise, as of right now, they seem to be on a pretty different level of playing field than almost everyone else too. So I'm really interested and just curious to see how that, if those schools do separate themselves. And I know I'm the Utah guy, and I still think Utah can obviously beat a BYU at any point, at Texas Tech, any of those schools. But look, Texas Tech just brought in a top 3 portal class. Like, I don't think Utah will ever get a top 3 portal class. And that's one thing, Shehan, too, that makes it so funny is when Nick Saban goes in and talks to me about like, oh, could it like Big 12 team actually go beat an SEC team? It's like, well, that Big 12 team is actually paying more for their roster than that SEC team. So I tend to believe they can. But how do you make this growing gap we're seeing in a conference like the Big 12, where some of the NIL differentials, do you think that will create a disparity in the conference?
Well, there's so many questions that are left to be answered about the House v. NCAA settlement, because there's sort of 2 thought processes on this, right? One is that, the question kind of is, for a school like Texas Tech, I think they've recognized this is the last moment that we're guaranteed to have a true Wild West. This might be our big opportunity to throw $20 million around, right, in the transfer portal. When it comes to both, by the way, basketball, where they retain JT Toppin, and also football, where you mentioned they've had the number 2 transfer class at number 1 at times, going back and forth with LSU. So that's one piece of it. So I think what becomes interesting is, if we do end up in the situation where we have the Deloitte clearinghouse, and we kind of get rid of the idea of circumventing the salary cap with collectives, like, that's where it gets interesting, because again, that it kind of gets us back a little bit to what it was like before the disparities and all the crazy money and all that sort of stuff. So I don't want to say it's that the only answer right now is that it really remains to be seen. But like, I do think that the way that rev share is handled and the way it's enforced more than anything else is going to impact this more than just about anything else. Because again, every team in the Big 12 plans to pay the $20.5 million rev share, and most will pay about $15 million to the football side. So the gaps in money shouldn't be massive, but you just don't really know until it actually all goes through.
Yeah, and those collectives are such an interesting factor. And once again, I'd mentioned BYU being in a separate tier. Utah, I think, is always going to be able to compete with and beat a BYU. But the interesting thing will be, how often does a Utah go in against Texas Tech, Colorado, BYU, and they're ranked higher? Because that is something that I feel like when you're consistently getting better talent, better pieces. Now, granted, Utah's been able to recruit and develop guys where Oregon, USC were doing that. Utah had their success in years beating them. So definitely not something where all's lost. Yeah.
And one last thing that I'd mention on that is, like, I don't think it's a coincidence that the 3 schools that are trying to throw the most money around are, and I would really say BYU and Texas Tech probably more than Colorado right now, are 2 schools that are trying to take advantage of this specific moment, right? Because BYU, obviously, they just transitioned to the power conferences for, the first time in a very long time. They're considered a power conference team. And Texas Tech, it's been 15 years since they've won 10 games. And they haven't had 3 straight winning seasons in a conference since the Southwest Conference folded in 1995. So, like, they're trying to, I think, there's a little bit of a feeding frenzy, I think, for those 2 schools especially, because this is the first time that they have as much resource and more fervency than anybody else. Whereas, like, you look at Utah, right? It's been a multi-year process where, they've built a program and invested and done all this stuff. I think that this moment is a little unique. Now, look, I mean, if some of the specific people involved in these schools continue to be heavily involved, obviously that's going to be a factor. But I think that they're also taking advantage of the fact that this is a little bit of a you're getting
it's
some
still the Wild
fatigue.
West, right?
Yeah, it's still the Wild West, and some of these other schools that have been investing for multiple years starting to get some donor fatigue, right? Where you've had these expensive rosters for multiple and multiple years. So again, it's going to be fascinating to see where we're at, when we're in July 2026, when there's been a year of this. What does it look like? But I do think that it's going to level out just a little bit. I think that 2025 in both football and basketball, by the way, might just be like a once in a lifetime type of blip.
You mentioned the donor fatigue. That was something of all people Charles Barkley brought up earlier today, is that with Auburn, like, I'm not giving $1 million every single year, like just to NIL and things like that. Like, I've given a ton to this school already, where I do feel like we are genuinely going to see that. And it's very interesting to see how it played out. You mentioned fatigue. I think that definitely set in amongst Utah fans with Cam Rising, with the injury. Will he play? Will he not play? So now that Cam has officially retired, I'm curious to talk to you, Shehan, about how the national perspective of Cam Rising could be different from Utah's. That's what we're going to discuss in one moment. Cam Rising was a polarizing figure when he played at Utah, and he had maybe one of the weirdest and just unfortunately saddest endings to a career we've seen. 2 legendary first couple of years with the team, and then just a constant will he play, will he not play, that basically made me rip all my hair out at this point. So it was quite the saga. It's finally ended, though. He announced his retirement. There was a reaction in Utah of like, hey, he's a legend. We love this guy. But then I think there was also just some frustrations and relief of like, okay, I was ready to be done with the Cam Rising era at Utah. How did college football, you think, kind of react to Cam's retirement as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, it was nice to be national because you could take a step back, and so I still got my hair, thank goodness. But I think it was so interesting, right? Because he has been such a transformational figure for the University of Utah. They finally break through and win the Pac-12. They go back, they do it again. They're picked first place in the Big 12 largely because Cameron Rising was expected to come back. They had a chance to have another special year, and they look pretty good, and then he gets hurt again, and so it's like there's these like, I mean, it's almost like a tragic opera in some ways, right? Where you just see what could be, but then like the next 2 years in so many ways are spent, are kind of lost years just because they tried to plan for a player who ultimately was not able to be there. And look, I mean, I think that from a national perspective, there's 2 sides of this, especially, right? One, I'm glad that he never played in anything other than a Utah uniform. I think that it would have really been, well,
he started his career at Texas too.
Yeah. But you know what I mean. He never played.
No, yes, for sure.
And so, like, and actually to go to Texas for 1 second, I mean, Quinn Ewers, for example, right? Like, he decided to enter the draft and end his college football career, overtaking a few $1 million in NIL to play next year. And a big part of it was the opportunity to be a Texas legend and to be somebody who has legacy at Texas, and a place that Texas, would take care of in so many ways. I mean, Lord knows, like, Vince Young has had so many kind of jobs in the athletic department where they take care of him, right? Mm-hmm. And like, Quinn Ewers is going to have that opportunity whenever his football career is done as well. And my hope is that part of this is like Cameron Rising gets that opportunity now, that he gets to be Utah through and through. Again, look, it's not going to be a secret, right? Like, the 2 years that were lost for the University of Utah because of his injuries, like, they'll never be back, right? Like, I mean, they obviously unfortunately wasted 2 prime years of this program and 2 prime years of Kyle Whittingham because of the injuries. But I do think that, now that it's over, I hope that we have an opportunity to all kind of sit back and appreciate what he brought to this program, what he did for this program, the kind of figure that he was, not just from an on-field perspective, but also the way that he really, I think, made a name for the program off-field as well. And I mean, look, he's planning to go and be a high school football coach in Southern California, where there's a lot of great players and there's a lot of great recruits and there's a lot of great quarterbacks as well. Like, I hope that he is able to continue to have and continue to build relationships with this fan base and with this program long-term, because I think, again, like, he is such an influential figure in college football at large.
From your national perspective, and he might be for me too, honestly, what I'm about to ask you, is he the second most important player in Utah football history among players? Is Alex Smith one, and is he two? And maybe even I'll say for the modern era, but just because of where he guided this team, is he the second most important?
Yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting question too, right? Because, like, I mean, like, Alex Smith was the number 1 pick, and obviously they win a BCS bowl. Like, that's huge. But there are some ways where, like, the way that they were able to break through in the power conferences also stands apart in its own way. I don't know if that makes it, I don't think that makes him number one. I think it's still Alex Smith, but like, he's in that conversation. Like, it's not crazy to have that conversation. And if they do go into the Big 12 and win it in year one, I think he is that player, right? Like, but the way that it ends certainly drags him down just a little bit. But, and I think that you can also like there's some great defensive linemen, right? And the way that they influence who, comes through this program and who follows and what they're, so it's like, it's hard to always compare players just a little bit. But I think that as a figure, he is as big as anybody in the modern history of Utah football, just because I think he helped show Utah that they could do it at this level, that they could do it on the biggest stage and the biggest conferences, on the national level of college football. And again, like, certainly he's not the only guy who made that happen, but I think he was the catalyst in so many ways.
Kyle Whittingham called him the best leaders, like one of the best leaders ever been around. And Kyle Whittingham does not hand out praise like that easily. So it's a huge compliment to him. Like, what Eric Weddle was at Utah. Like, Eric Weddle was obviously a better player than Cam Rising, but there's something to be said of being the quarterback and being the guy who in those moments, and Cam Rising was the face of a team that beat Oregon not once but twice in a season, that beat USC not once but twice in a season, and helped the school go back to back and reshape their legacy. And you mentioned such an important thing too earlier, by the way. Cam Rising was one of the biggest reasons that Utah was projected to win the Big 12. I think that's unfortunately, like, the perception around Utah was really negative entering the Big 12, because all these people are like, why is everyone picking Utah to win? And it's like, well, they have a bunch of guys who have been here for years and they've won it at the highest level. And in a sport like college football and a conference like the Big 12, it's unpredictable. Utah's a very logical and reasonable pick. It's not just because we're coming in. Yes, there's always going to be those loud fans who just say, oh, we're just the best in this conference. It was just like, hey, this collection of Utah talent was the best. And because it never got to be materialized, and we're talking about those two offensive linemen, you have two guys like that who you don't get a quarterback the level that you can maximize the protection and the time they provide to, is really unfortunate. But it is funny too how Cam not playing and just everything kind of happened there. It was a perfect storm for Utah to be the villains of this conference entering the season, and then the villain went out in not good fashion, as they didn't even make a bowl game. And this is a team too, Shehan, that I feel like this Utah team that how do you view their Big 12 perception moving forward after they started out and looked like this and now where they're at?
It's interesting. I feel like they've been humbled a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that everybody around the Big 12 is a little like relieved about that. Yeah. That's, everybody's kind of like, okay, when Utah came in, there was this idea of like, we're too good for this. We're better than this. We shouldn't be a part of this. Like y'all have fun, other 3-4 corners schools, but like, we're different. We're not like that. Obviously, Arizona State is instead the one that pops up and wins the conference. And so, and by the way, this doesn't even count the basketball side, where obviously things were really tough in their first year as well. Like the thing that's interesting, because like, I think that when you compare the Big 12 to the legacy Pac-12, like there are more blue chip programs, I guess you could call them, in the old Pac-12. But the thing that's different about the Big 12, and we talked about this a little off the top, is everybody is investing at the maximal level. That like, you can't be Colorado like they were in 2013 in the Pac-12.
Yeah.
Because like, you just have to keep pushing. I mean, the odds came out the other day, right? I think from Circa that they just got shared. And every single team in the Big 12 is between 5.5 and 8.5 for their win totals. Like, that's insane. That's like never happened, right? So I think that there's a little bit more of a recognition from Utah people of this is a really competitive conference that certainly, I mean, Utah and Utah fans should see them as capable of being as good as anybody, but anybody also has the capability of being as good as them as well.
They absolutely do. It's what makes this conference electric, and why you got to have hope if you're a Utah fan that you can be the Arizona State that bounces back and wins it this year. It's going to be fun to see where it all plays out. And this is going to be an incredible college football season as well, Shehan. I cannot wait to see how it all ends up playing out. Please let everyone know where they can find more of your stuff at too.
Yeah, you can find me on all social media platforms at Shehan Jeyarajah, and you can find me and all of my work at cbssports.com.
Always a blast, man. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's going to do it for today's Locked On Utes. We'll be back tomorrow talking the latest in Utah football and Utah athletics. Hope you'll join us then.